Hello, I'm Michael Marshall. Welcome to UPI Perspectives. Our guest today is His Excellency General Jehangir Karamat, Ambassador of Pakistan to the United States. Ambassador Karamat assumed his post in November of 2004, bringing to diplomacy a strong military background. He's been Pakistan's chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Chief of the Army Staff. He's also been a visiting scholar at the Brookings Institute here in Washington and other public policy centers. Welcome, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Now, your country, Pakistan, is the second most populous Muslim country in the world after Indonesia. It's also one of the 7 declared nuclear powers. We'll leave aside North Korea for the moment. And your country most recently has been an active partner in the war on terror. President Musharraf was recently in Australia, where he made agreements with the Prime Minister there on greater cooperation in the war on terror. So I'd like to ask you, what is the role that Pakistan is playing in the war on terror, and why has the Pakistani government decided to give that such a prominent role in its foreign policy?
Yes, you know, you to understand that you've got to go back a little, that when the US and their allies were confronting communism in Afghanistan after the Soviet invasion, Pakistan was really a frontline state in that whole struggle. And that's where the whole thing on Afghanistan started, because after that Afghanistan went through various phases of civil war, the Taliban government, then the Al-Qaeda takeover of the Taliban government. So Pakistan's position has always been that it wants a stable Afghanistan. It's vital for Pakistan's economic interest in Central Asia. It's vital for bilateral relations with Afghanistan. And the blowback from the whole Afghanistan situation, which has played out over decades, has been horrendous for Pakistan in terms of drugs, violence, and so on.
This is flowing over from the instability in Afghanistan.
So that's why when this dreadful 9/11 incident happened, and Pakistan had this opportunity to change its policy, reverse policy in Afghanistan, join the United States in the international war on terror, Pakistan did so without hesitation. And since then, we've been a very close ally of the United States and pivotal in the war on terror because of our location and the whole background with Afghanistan.
So what are the specific or concrete measures, the main measures that your country is taking in the war on terror?
Yeah, well, being Afghanistan's neighbor and with a ethnic similarity to southern Afghanistan and our western province, we have a very important role to play. It's in terms of intelligence cooperation with the United States, both technical and human. It's in the context of having an effective border security force on our western border, which works in tandem with US forces and Afghan forces operating on the Afghanistan side of
This is to try and control the flow of
This is to control the border. This is to bring the border under control. It's a mountainous border. It's been porous for a very long time. It was opened up during the struggle against communism. So it's to bring that border under control. It's to deny sanctuaries to any terrorists in the mountainous areas astride that border. And it is to actively undertake operations on the basis of actionable intelligence on our side of the border should we discover any people, terrorists, aliens seeking sanctuaries there.
Now, that role that you're playing and the close cooperation with the United States is not universally popular in Pakistan. There's a number of political parties, the MMA, for our viewers, the alliance of 6 religious parties, and other parties have been very critical of this closeness of cooperation, saying that it compromises Pakistan's independence, that it compromises the integrity of Pakistan as an Islamic nation. What's your response to that?
Well, as far as the Islamic nation bit is concerned, I don't think any Islamic nation condones terror. and Islam certainly doesn't. The other is that we have been the victims of terrorism for a long time. There have been horrendous incidents within Pakistan and some really bad incidents after 9/11 once the war on terror started. And Pakistan became a sort of a place where Al-Qaeda and other terrorists thought they could seek and get sanctuaries. And then they resorted to bombings and all kinds of other violence. So Pakistan's position is very clear, and most of the population understands that. As far as the position taken by some elements is concerned, you've got to look at it in the context of the political situation playing out in Pakistan. Because political parties, once they're hunting for votes, they tend to take all sorts of positions which mellow down later once they are in government and are confronted with the actual situation.
We've had plenty of experience of that here in the United States.
Yes. So what you want to do is not confront or marginalize any elements who are opposed to the policies, but to bring them mainstream and to get them to feel the responsibility for the war on terror, to get them to come out with the positions which are rational and which will lead to results and not get us deeper into trouble. And I think there's a realization. There may be a segment of the population which, for the reasons I've said, is opposed or is opposing as an expedient the whole policy on Afghanistan. But within that also, you do not see them actively condemning the war on terror. You don't see them sponsoring or encouraging terrorism. You do see them, in terms of what you said, saying things like Pakistan's sovereignty should not be compromised, and we should not be doing what the US is telling us to do. So the government is very careful in that, and its policies are very clear. It's never compromised on sovereignty. And what it is doing, it's really in its own interest, in the country's interest, and not necessarily just US interest. If the two interests converge, as they obviously do in the war on terror, then I think it's important that we continue with those policies, regardless of any segments who are opposed to it.
Now, the US in general and the administration in particular obviously have a great interest in catching Osama bin Laden. And he's widely reputed to be hiding in the mountainous western areas, the tribal provinces of Pakistan. What do you think today are the prospects of catching him anytime soon?
Let me put it like that with all the intelligence work that is going on there, we've had very few reliable leads as to where Osama bin Laden is. And also with over 700 arrests in Pakistan's urban and border areas, people some of whom have been handed over to the US, and the US has interrogated them, there hasn't been any real lead as to where he is or where he could be. There is always the possibility, as I said, it's a mountainous area. Some areas are very, very remote, that he could be in one of those areas. But with the kind of combing operations that have been carried out along the western border, the kind of reward money that's been posted, the kind of intelligence work and follow-up interrogations and so on, all that's been done should have turned up some leads if he was anywhere accessible, or if he was in one of the cities, for example. He's a very tall person, would stand out. And he's a prominent man, at least in those areas, so it's difficult to completely disappear. I mean, if he is in one of those remote areas, then it's not so much the local population. He would be cordoned, and there may be more than one cordon, by people completely loyal to him, his own people. And he must be in an area confined to a compound or some kind of restricted space where he can live and not really operate, because, as our president said recently, the back of the movement is really broken.
Is there a fear that if he were finally captured, that the United States would say to Pakistan, thank you very much, and then lose much of its interest in Pakistan, reduce its level of support?
That fear is there. It's there among the people. It's there because of the immediate US pullout after communism collapsed. That fuels this kind of thinking. But I think, and by now most people know it, that the US has a multi-billion-dollar, multi-year investment in the stability of Pakistan, just like it has in the stability of Afghanistan. The US is there not just in terms of F-16s and so on, it's there in terms of our economy, in terms of our social sector reforms especially, and in terms of a good regional environment, bilateral relations with India, resolution of disputes and so on. And for once, the US has a very clear, consistent policy in South Asia for Afghanistan, for Pakistan, for India, and I think there is a realization of that.
Let's shift from the war on terror to relations with India. Pakistan has fought 3 wars with India since partition in 1947, and often the flashpoint has been the dispute over Kashmir. Recently, President Musharraf said that he was very hopeful that a solution to Kashmir could be found. What, in your view, would a solution to the Kashmir problem look like that would be acceptable to both Pakistan and India?
I think when you start thinking of a solution, you've got to sort of flag the landmark events which have taken place in this whole process. And the first one was the President Musharraf's declaration of a ceasefire in Kashmir along the line of control. As you know, it's a situation where there was continuous violence. So that ceasefire has held for more than a year now, almost 15, 16 months, which is a remarkable achievement. And the violence has gone down along the line of control and in Kashmir. That's one event which was. The other is the dialogue process itself, which started. Pakistan had repeatedly offered dialogue, and India was reluctant. But once India came on board and this dialogue started and